Good evening, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to the first Fifth Estate for the year, and I think the first event here in the Wheeler home base for the year as well. And I'm so excited to be back, and I'm particularly thrilled about this evening's lineup. We promised you last year at the last Fifth Estate that we would have something very special for you to try and explain what has gone on in the United States within the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency. It is day 39. There's 1,421 to go in the first term, if it goes to length, which I suspect it will. So there's much to discuss, and joining us are two people who are really, they really can help us to understand what happened, what's going on now, and what we might look forward to in the next 1,421 days. Thomas Frank is a former columnist for the Wall Street Journal and Harper's and founding editor of The Baffler. He's a best-selling author of books including Pity the Billionaire, The Wrecking Crew, and the very influential What's the Matter with Kansas. His latest book, which was written and published, I think, months before the election, is a really devastating critique of the Democrats, and obviously they did not read it. But I don't know, maybe Donald Trump did.
There's reason to think he did.
Yeah, okay, all right.
We'll talk about that.
We will talk about that. So it's called Listen, Liberal, Whatever Happened to the Party of the People. And he lives outside Washington, D.C., which I guess is what everyone wants to say now, isn't it? Cynthia Schneider.
Canada.
Cynthia Schneider is Distinguished Professor in the Practice of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. She teaches full-time there, and her focus is on cultural diplomacy, particularly in the Muslim world. She's done so many things on her CV, the Brookings Institution, all sorts of places. She was the US ambassador to the Netherlands from 1998 to 2001, so that would have been President Clinton.
Yes.
Oh, one of your favourite people, Thomas. And she's currently writing a book on the role of culture in foreign policy and international relations, titled Culture on the Front Lines, 21st Century Diplomacy. Please give them a very warm welcome. Thomas, you argue that the Democrats are not the party that we think they are, that they're certainly not the party of the working classes. They're the party of overeducated professionals who are contemptuous of the working classes. And in some ways, you know, I read this book and think they had it coming. Tell us why.
So the Democrats, so they, you know, they're, as I travel the world and tell people about this, I discover that this is a problem that that people are having, with left parties all over the world. In our system in the United States, where it's a two-party system and it's essentially locked in. There's no chance of a third party unseating one of the major parties these days. In that system, the more left of our two parties, Democrats, was, in its heyday, in the day when it was, the sort of foundation period, the golden age of the Democratic Party was closely identified with working class people, middle class people, and organized labor. And today, it is a party that really identifies with a different group, with what they call professionals in America, white collar people with advanced degrees. And they've sort of developed over the years, and I'll fill out all the details as we go along, but they've developed over the years a sort of ideology where they understand this class of people as being the sort of winners of history. They stand at the end of the great dialectic, the creative class, they call them. And there's many consequences to this shift from being a party that cares about working class people to being a party that cares about winners, to be a party that cares about the new economy winners. And one of these is that they have real trouble dealing with things like, well, when, say, Wall Street contrives to defraud the entire world. They have, someone like, say, Franklin Roosevelt. You all know who this is? Franklin Roosevelt, he was our president during World War II. When Wall Street acted in a similar way during the 1920s, he came down on them like a ton of bricks, okay? Or you look at not all that long, this is actually Republicans in the 1980s when Wall Street, it wasn't really Wall Street, but regional banks had been doing, a lot of real estate shenanigans. They got in a lot of trouble. A lot of people were prosecuted. This time around, Wall Street manages to throw the entire global economy off a cliff. We elect Barack Obama in this great wave of hope and enthusiasm to do something about it, and he basically lets these guys go, gives them a nice bailout, and they're back to their bonuses are back where they started, while the rest of the country, the recovery comes very, very slowly for them. So this is sort of how the book starts, How is it possible that the party of the people, the party of the working class, the party that's supposed to care about the common man, allows something like this to take place? That does these extraordinary favors for the people at the top of the system, while the people at the bottom are watching their way of life crumble before their eyes. And they are. I mean, this is what's happening in America. And Donald Trump, who I regard as a buffoon, and as a kind of genius imbecile, I guess. I don't know what the right word is for Donald Trump. But this guy, who seems so unfit for the job of the presidency, managed to really capture what I just described, managed to really talk about this to workers and middle-class people all over America in a sort of a way that's unprecedented for a Republican. Republicans, of course, being the traditional party of big business, of the billionaire class. And that's, in my mind, that's ultimately why he succeeded. There's a lot of other reasons, and there's a lot of complications, and there's a lot of screw-ups, and there's the FBI getting involved in the campaign in a really crazy way. There's a million insane things that went on. I mean, it was a circus. But ultimately, the guy spoke to the great grievance of the American middle class. Now, I don't think he'll be able to do anything about it. I don't think he even really cares to do anything about it, but he did speak to it.
Cynthia, what's your take on this? And in regard to what Thomas has just said, the one thing that I still can't understand in that explanation is how it can be Donald Trump, how somebody like him can, whose education is as elite as Bill Clinton's or Barack Obama's, who is so establishment in so many ways, can be the one to be the great hope and bearer of this message to impoverished America.
So lucky you to get to listen to me now, because I was actually here in May, and I, pretty much predicted all of this with one just slight detail that I missed. And that is that I agree completely with what you've said, Thomas, and I did give a number of talks talking about the very real economic grievances in the United States. I think the 2008 crisis didn't hit here nearly as badly, and it was really catastrophic in the United States. And I think for the last 8 years, people have kept hearing, it's a recovery, but they don't feel it. They don't feel it. And so I explained all that at great length. And then I went on to say, but even so, there just are not enough angry white men to elect Donald Trump. So don't listen to anything I say, because I certainly did not.
We all said that, though. That's
I did not call that one. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the more negative side of what you said, Thomas, and I completely agree with it, but I think there's another book that the Democrats have not read, and it's a book called The Political Brain. It's by actually a neuroscientist called Drew Weston. And in that book, and this is so intuitive, we all know it, but Drew did this based on actual scientific experiments. He demonstrates and proves that political decisions, big surprise, are driven by emotions. They are not driven by a 10-piece policy plan. They are not driven by my Brookings policy papers, read by 3.5 people. They are driven by emotions, and Donald Trump totally gets that. And the emotions he played on are not our loftiest emotions. These people who were very much left behind, have lost not only their sense of their future, but their sense of dignity. Their sense of who they are in the world. And Donald Trump played on those emotions, saying, number one, I am going to destroy the people who did this to you, the high-up people who did this to you, and I'm also going to destroy the people who are coming into this country trying to destroy your way of life. So he played on this sense of insecurity and instability in a simply overtly racist way. People in trouble very often are looking for someone beneath them. They want something to make them feel good about themselves. And so one of the most appalling things, and it's very hard to know what's at the top of the list, but one of the most appalling things Donald Trump has done is to create an open platform for racism and to make a kind of overt racism and xenophobia acceptable in a way that, it hasn't been in my lifetime. And this has fueled action. There is a 197% increase in anti-Muslim acts, actual persecution, people attacking people. And, what he has unleashed, and this is part of everything, even crazy things like that insane Sweden comment, that they're terrorists are taking Sweden apart, which of course was based on some insane cable news thing that he saw. It wasn't even true. And of course the poor Swedes had to say, no, but in it is a kernel of truth that you had this, blonde Scandinavian place that has opened its doors to refugees, and, big surprise, that doesn't work out instantaneously. But we are not Sweden. We are a country of immigrants like you. That is our core identity. And Donald Trump is really trying to tear that apart in a very dangerous way.
There's a class that you describe, really. It's a political class of the left in America. And you, in your book, go through, Clinton, it's like you've just run over him with a bulldozer. It's a really bruising critique to read of a president that, of course, has the loftiest of places in more recent memory. You're a little bit softer.
Do you think so?
I think so.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, certainly polls would say so.
Who
polls would say so.
We don't live there, so.
Yeah, and your and your polls are not to be trusted, I guess.
It's the Chicagoan in me.
yeah.
Sorry, it's a inside joke.
And you say in the book that you're a bit softer, I think, towards Hillary, but not really. And then Barack Obama, you apply the same sort of
My former hero.
Tell us about these threads. Of course, they're the leaders, but they're representing all the people that work around them, all the people that work for them, and about this class that seem to be blinded in, I think the words you would use, self-righteousness.
Okay, that's a lot to try to answer.
You wrote it,
that's going to take all night.
Yeah, off you go.
You got to leave me some time to retrieve Bill Clinton, so don't take all night.
I think it's really important because it also has real resonance here.
Is that so?
I think so, and we'll come to that.
Okay, so Bill Clinton was a Democrat, and at the time was regarded as a great hero because Democrats had been on a losing streak before he ran for the presidency, and he got elected. It was a great success story. And, widely admired, and the economy did really well his last 3 years in office, and so people look back at the days of Clinton's presidency as good times. And at the same time, you had the Republican Party, the party of the right in America, that persecuted him in a way that was so manifestly unfair. I mean, they even impeached the guy for, having an affair with an intern. And so when people look back at him, they tend to be sympathetic. They remember the good times. They don't really think about what he did as president. And so I sort of revisited the Clinton presidency. And the way I did it was by reading books written by his admirers and his friends and his cabinet members, people who were close to him and who thought he really was, one of the greatest presidents we ever had. And Clinton had a lot of achievements as president, lots of little things, many of them that I think were pretty good. He had 5 big main achievements that his biographers admire him for. And I'm going to go down the list and tell you what they were. The first was the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. It had been negotiated by Republicans, by the George Bush administration. The second one was mass incarceration of black people. They called it the Crime Bill of 1994. And mass incarceration was, what I mean by that, do you understand what I'm talking about when I say mass incarceration? We have an enormous prison population in the United States. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's like, second only to the Soviet Union or something like this in the old days. It's outrageous. And this was largely, Bill Clinton's crime bill in 1994 was, he had a big hand in accomplishing this. And in some ways it was deliberate, and I'll give you the details on that in a minute. The third thing he did that his admirers really think was awesome was to deregulate banks and deregulate telecom. The fourth thing was, what was it? Yeah, he abolished welfare, the welfare reform system. We have a system in America going back to the 1930s to support, what is it? Women with no husband and children.
Single mother.
Single mother. God, I'm losing my mind. It's the jet lag here. Jesus H. Christ. That's gone now, and they turned it over to the states. It's been a disaster. And the fourth was he balanced the budget. The fifth was he balanced the budget. Now, this is the fascinating thing about all 5 of these accomplishments. Every single one of them is a Republican accomplishment. These were all Republican proposals, every single one of them, and he got them done. The other really amazing coincidence is that every single one of them was, with the exception of balancing the budget, every single one of them ended in disaster. I mean, huge, honking, flat-out disaster. NAFTA is the roadmap for deindustrialization. It ruined his friends in organized labor. And they complain about it all. Well, they fought him on it. They fought him very bitterly. And this is a year after he'd just been elected, and they turned over their treasury to this guy, done everything they could to get him elected, and he turns around and puts the knife right in their back with this thing. What's the next one? I've already forgotten my own stupid list. But deregulation of banks obviously is what, Jesus Christ. And he deregulated them not once, not twice, but many times in the course of his presidency. And this, obviously culminated in the financial crisis of 2008, with many other minor scandals along the way. Deregulation of telecoms has led to monopolization. You see what I'm getting at here. Abolishing welfare turned out to be a terrible idea if you care about poor people, if you care about working class people. It pulls the floor out from under wages. Of course, mass incarceration is, this is a human rights violation. The only one that you can argue about, I think, is the balanced budget. And do you want me to say it? This was stupid too. He balanced the budget in the teeth of a recession. Why do that? Okay, it worked out for him for very complicated. He got lucky.
So the question,
for very complicated
Thomas,
reasons,
is why?
Why did he do these things?
Well, yeah, and in a more general, because we don't have all night, and we've got to move on from Bill. But what was going on at the heart of the party from that time through now, that you end up with a Democratic Party that has seemingly lost its way, and Donald Trump as president?
Well, Clinton he represented, there had been a civil war in the Democratic Party leading up to his presidency, all through the 70s, all through the 80s. These guys trying to figure out what to do with themselves. And this goes back to the Vietnam era. And basically, Democrats decided that they needed to walk away from organized labor, their sort of traditional social institution that they were identified with, needed to walk away from these guys and identify instead with this, the professional class, the sort of winners in your new economy. And Bill Clinton was a strong believer in this approach. He even said that he wasn't a traditional Democrat. He was a new Democrat. He was charting a third way for left parties all over the world. Tony Blair, agreed with him on this. This was one of their sort of great gifts to humanity. And the Democratic Party has really never looked back. They look at Bill Clinton and his philosophy as the road to success. And, that's one of the sort of crushing ironies of the Hillary Clinton campaign, is that she is of course, obviously, as his wife, is the inheritor of this strategy and this philosophy. This is the victory philosophy for the Democratic Party, and it just crashed and burned.
I know you all didn't come here to talk about Bill Clinton, so I'm going to just be very quick. And, you've researched this much more deeply than I have, but I don't agree with what you said. And there are a lot of changes that have that have taken place in our country, and one of them, and it's a very sad thing, is the incredible weakening of organized labor. Bill Clinton is not to blame for that. That has to do with state control of labor laws, and my husband works with organized labor, and I'm sorry to say, I know this personally because our family income is decreasing too. There simply are not that many organized workers anymore, and this is a gradual change that has taken place over the last 30 years. The welfare reform was not about abolishing welfare and having people have no welfare. It was about enabling people to work and creating conditions, training, education, job placement that enable people, including single mothers, to move out of a situation of generational unemployment. It did not solve all these problems. We still have these problems of generational unemployment, but it did change the lives positively for many, many people. I'm sure NAFTA is not the perfect treaty, and our current president believes that America can thrive alone. We're going to make America great again alone. And anyone who thinks that, good luck. Mexico is a very important trading partner. Canada is the most important trading partner. It is the North American Free Trade Agreement with those three countries. And anyone who thinks we can survive without those two countries, good luck. Bill Clinton was fueled by a belief in enabling people to achieve their potential. It was a positive vision that caught on. It had behind it the idea of real economic growth and everybody coming along with the economic growth. He did indeed try to bring the Democrats more towards the middle. He understood the political brain. He understood the power of emotion in politics, and he understood how to reach people by communicating stories, real stories, that connected with them. Hillary Clinton has the most positive motives in the world. She does not, just inherently have that same facility with political connection. If you get her in a smaller group, and sometimes in larger groups, it works great, but it's not part of her DNA. It's very much part of Bill Clinton's DNA. But the biggest problem, I think, with Hillary Clinton this year, who is certainly the most qualified candidate to run for president in a very long time, but the biggest problem is she was the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. when you are looking, and the Democrats were too, when you are looking for, someone out of the establishment, which, Barack Obama kind of looked like, but in many ways, he was a disappointment to many people. When you're looking for someone outside the establishment, it is not a good idea to nominate the most establishment politician.
What worries each of you the most about this administration, about the Trump administration?
Oh, God.
But it's hard to know where to begin. I would just begin by saying a couple of things. What I mentioned, this open platform for racism and really fueling xenophobia and fueling the divisions that exist in our country. I live in a bubble in Maryland. Maybe you've gotten out of it, but I kind of live in a bubble. I don't know a lot of Trump voters in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. We also have a place in Florida. I know a lot of Trump voters there. And they are really nice people. I'll give you an example. A couple who spent their entire life in the public schools, a superintendent and a school counselor from Syracuse, New York. How can they support someone who has appointed someone with no experience in publication with the express purpose of destroying the Department of Public Education? The way they can do it is they live in a different world. They watch only Fox News. They do not see the same reality that people who don't watch Fox News nonstop see. And that is very scary, that division between the worlds we live in, the racism and xenophobia, anti-anyone different, and then, quite honestly, just the simple fact, you use the word buffoon, I couldn't agree with you more, that you have someone who is completely uninformed. I mean, I just can't emphasize this enough how uninformed he is, with no desire to improve that situation, not a scintilla of curiosity. And he's in charge. Now they're, minding him, and apparently his minders try to appease him by giving him positive news stories about him that helps him tweet less. And they try to limit, I am not kidding, they try to limit the hours he spends in front of television. Any of you have children? You try to limit the amount of hours? Well, this is where we are. So, just the lack of knowledge and experience and desire to gain it is really terrifying.
The thing that scared me the most at first was foreign policy, that the guy would somehow get us entangled in a war, or that he would screw up our relationship, because he knows so little about it. But I think that fear is sort of is going away, because he has appointed some people that know what they're doing. The larger fear is you've got a Republican Congress, okay? You've got people that know what they want to do, and he's going to sign their legislation. These are people who have been around for a long time. They know how government works, and they know how to take the sledgehammer to the sort of, central supports of what is left of the welfare state in America, and they're going to do it. Thirdly is the Supreme Court. And I still can't believe that the Republican sort of gambit of not, of ignoring Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick for an entire year in hopes that they would win the election and then get their own guy, and that actually worked. It worked, and he's going to do it. Well, he has done it. He has named, he's chosen his own, nominee for the Supreme Court, and they have got a whole bunch of awesome things that they are going to get ready to do, and one of them involves further destroying organized labor. And if I could use that as a segue to go back to the labor is, like you, this is an issue that I write about all the time, and I cover strikes and stuff like that in America. And organized labor is on its way down in the United States. And this is very important to understand. This is not because people don't want to join a union. It's because if you try to form a union in your workplace in America, you'll be fired. Okay, immediately. The boss will find out who the ringleader is and he'll fire your ass. Okay, that's against the law in the United States. It's against the law in a lot of places. But in America, we don't enforce that law. All right, now for years, the labor movement has pleaded with Democratic politicians to do something about this, to put teeth into this law, this law that we've had since the 1930s, to make it possible to form a union again in America. And every time Democratic politicians come into office, by the way, this goes back to Carter, first Carter, then Clinton, then Obama, and Labor, which has backed them to the hilt and done everything to get them elected, says, look, here's our one thing, here's our one demand, our one piece of legislation. With Obama, it was called card check. Okay, the idea was it would make it easier to form a union. And the president's like, sorry, I'm busy. I got other things to worry about. See ya. Again and again and again, these guys get betrayed by the politicians that they put into office. And what Trump's Supreme Court is going to do is basically the only part of the labor movement that's still growing in America is in the public sector, people that work for the government. And this is in front of the bulldozer now. They've got that sucker revved up, and the Supreme Court is going to make that essentially impossible. And when they do that, the labor movement in America is going to be in huge trouble. Now, why does any of this matter? Because when we talk about inequality and about the way that the American middle class is falling apart, this is one of the big reasons for it, that essentially workers don't have a voice anymore. They aren't able to come together. They aren't able to do the things that they're able to do in nearly every other Western country.
Isn't it true, though, that the Labor movement on the whole backed Hillary Clinton when Bernie Sanders was really speaking their language? I mean, they've got a responsibility.
No, they make a lot of strategic and tactical blunders. That is true, but
that's a pretty
they thought they were backing the winner, is what they thought they were doing. Now, the rank and file, the actual leadership of the labor movement was behind Hillary 100%, but the rank and file, a lot of them went for Trump this time because of Trump's. Now, this is where the trade agreement stuff becomes very important. I was watching Trump speeches on YouTube. There's a lot of people that do this. They sit around and watch Trump speeches on YouTube. I'm one of these people. And this is back about
and you're still smiling. That's
No. I mean, it's all the only way to live with this stuff is to laugh at it. Believe me, folks. But God, I sound like him now. Sad. Believe me, folks. Anyhow, so I'm watching a whole bunch of Trump rallies. This is about a year ago, and he wanders. He has these enormous rallies, like 30,000 people come to them, and he wanders all over the place. His mind wanders. It's like a Facebook feed, It's like, I'm talking about this now, I'm talking about that now, And it's totally unconnected. Here he's...
except it's about him.
It's always he's at the center, of course. But he says the sort of the bigotry stuff, the fear of aliens, but he keeps coming back to one issue, which is trade. And he keeps coming back to the idea that we've had lousy trade deals, and that these lousy trade deals have in some way brought about the deindustrialization of the United States. He's right. Now, you scratch the surface and the dude doesn't know what he's talking about. You ask him about any of the details of this, he doesn't know anything about it. But this is, the people in organized labor have been hearing this for years, and if they're not hearing it from their leadership, they're hearing it from the boss. The guy who says, if you strike, if you so much as file a grievance, or they say to the city government, if you raise our taxes, we're moving to Mexico. Or we're moving to somewhere else, we're moving to Arkansas, or whatever it is. But we're getting out of this place. And we can do it because the government lets us do it. These trade agreements that Trump is yelling about were written expressly for that purpose. They're not really free trade agreements. They're trade deals designed to protect American investment overseas. That's what NAFTA was anyway. I mean, it's complicated. But that's what Trump is talking about, and this struck a chord for these people. They look at Hillary. By the way, Hillary was saying the same thing. Hillary was trying her best. I'm there too, she would say. I'm against the TPP. You know what the TPP was, because of course you're part of it. I'm against NAFTA too. I'm against the TPP too, she would say. But no one believed her. Why did no one believe her? First of all, because her husband was the man that got NAFTA done. And second of all, and this is, when we talk about the blunders that handed the White House to Donald Trump, here's Barack Obama, while all this is going on, while Trump is out there yelling about the TPP, here's Obama trying to get it done. And here's poor Hillary saying, I'm against it too. I know I said I was in favor of it a couple of years ago, but now I'm against it. Please believe me. And here's Obama saying, no, we got to get this thing passed through Congress. It's like, why? I mean, well, they thought Trump had no chance. They thought there's no way this guy can win, so we can do whatever we want. And he wound up sabotaging her.
How strong, sorry, did you want to?
Well, I'm just going to say there is also a very important element which Trump never mentions, and that is the transformation of the workplace through automation. So yes, companies move, but the companies that stay also employ a fraction of the people. And the jobs they are not coming back. You can build walls, you can build whatever you want. Manufacturing as it was known in the Midwest is not coming back. There are new job opportunities. They require training for new workplaces. They require particularly training in programming and things like that. And some philanthropists or people who've made their fortune in manufacturing are starting to do this, starting to provide training programs for people who used to work in steel plants, used to work in manufacturing, used to work in coal plants. And what is so heartbreaking about Donald Trump is, he is pretending to care for these people. And he's pretending, that if he rants and raves about foreigners enough, and, God knows who from Mexico enough, that's somehow going to make these people's lives better. No, it is not. They do need help, and they do need help from the government. That is the government's role. And there should be, in fact, a massive training and re-education. And you don't hear a whisper about that.
So this is something I disagree on. I think that Trump actually can bring a lot of those jobs back. You make it a little bit harder to close the steel mill. The steel mill's not going to move to, make it a little bit harder to move that overseas. It's not going to move overseas. It's very simple. By the way, about automation, the economist term for this is productivity. Productivity growth in America is very slow right now. I mean, it's really hot with your iPhone, right? We're constantly inventing new crap on the iPhone, new apps. But in every other field, it's slowed to a crawl. Now, here's the interesting thing. Once upon a time, America had incredible productivity growth after World War II up to the 1970s. The golden age of, the American, I don't want to say American capitalism because it was a very different sort of system. We had incredible productivity growth back then, but here's the crazy thing. Workers prospered. When you have productivity growth, workers are, by definition, back then, by the definition of the 60s and the 50s and the 70s, workers do well. Today, productivity slows to a crawl, and we say, oh, there's all of this productivity growth, and you guys just can't participate in it anymore. Now, why do we do that? I think a lot of it is because I think the way wages are structured is a political thing. That the real reason that workers aren't prospering these days is because they don't have power any longer. Because management has every weapon and workers have nothing. Even their own political party won't stand up for them anymore. Management can, all of these threats, all of this kind of stuff. One of my friends, the economist Dean Baker, you might know him, in DC, Dean Baker is forever pointing out that we have this in America nowadays, thanks to these trade agreements that Trump hates, and that I think he's right to hate. It's the one thing that I think he's right about, but he isn't really right about it. We'll talk about that later. But
we won't, because we're fast running out of time.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So we have an enormous trade deficit in the United States, and it's almost entirely has to do with manufacturing. If you fix that deficit, if you do something to fix that deficit, whatever it is, renegotiate the trade deals, fiddle with the currency, whatever it is, by definition, manufacturing would return to the United States. That's the manufacturing went away. That's the trade deficit. You bring it back, the trade deficit goes away. We've talked about undoing the trade deficit for decades. When you do that, you're going to have more manufacturing jobs in America by definition. It's just math.
I want to ask you about the Republican Party and how you think it's going to hold up to Trump, because I can't really read it. How strong it is, I know George W. Bush gave an interview, I think overnight, where he really had a bit of a slap at Trump about his relationship with the media and produced what I think is just the quote of possibly the year so far. He said, we need the media to hold people like me to account.
Wow, good for
George
him.
Bush said that?
George W. Bush said
What a
this
scoundrel.
overnight. He was giving an interview because he's releasing a new book of his paintings.
Yeah,
So he's been very productive. He's had plenty of time to reflect, and he did a big truth thing by saying that. And obviously, the Republican Party are not an entirely happy, solid family at the moment, but they seem pretty pleased with all the power they've got. How do you think that's going to play out?
There's a wonderful, I don't know, it was a tweet or cartoon or something which said that Mitch McConnell, who's the head of the Senate, the lead Republican in the Senate, and Paul Ryan, the lead Republican in the House of Representatives in the Congress, were medical miracles because they were able to stand upright without spines. And I think that pretty much, sums up the Republican Party. Big surprise, they love power. Big surprise, they'll sell their souls to have it. The Mitch McConnell, this is the guy who said after President Obama was elected, and honestly, in hindsight, President Obama was way too nice. And the Democrats were way too weak. How lame. They were just pathetic. They did not hold these people to account. I mean, Mitch McConnell said after President Obama was elected, the whole world loves him, which, by the way, President Obama didn't really make anything out of that either in the first 2 years. But still, the whole world loves him. And this man, a senator, says, well, the only thing I care about in the next 8 years is stopping everything President Obama tries to do. I mean, excuse me, are we not part of the same country? It is just unbelievable, and they were allowed to do that. But, now they're standing straight without spines, and they will, she says bitterly, pay for it. I really think they will, because there's no coming back from this. And, well, look what happened to Chris Christie. Donald Trump also will just cut that was the governor from New Jersey, who I heard the other day is at a 19% approval rating. Who totally sucked. He was once popular. He sucked up to Trump. He did anything. If you want to see, I have a great image. Was when Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, and he was sort of hugging Chris Christie on stage, who you notice is nowhere now. He dropped him like a lead balloon, but he's hugging him on the stage, and there is Chris Christie's wife, and man, does she look miserable. I would also take a look at the Supreme Court nominee's wife when Trump presented him Neil Gorsuch. Take a look at her. She's dying. Yeah. Inside too, but she's there. She's there. So the Republicans are in power. They're craven, but they are also imploding and having a major identity crisis. And I think they'll seriously suffer after this. I want to turn over to you in 1 second. I just want to shift for 1 second back to foreign policy. Because I think right today, and I didn't get a chance to see it because I was running around all day, but Donald Trump went to the Congress and was going to give an address. It was going to last an hour. God knows, he's probably talking about the crowd at the inauguration again, but somehow was going to, showing pictures,
awesome.
This is my crowd. They're really big, really huge. But anyway, somehow he's going to talk for an hour. And his point was we need a massive military buildup. What is it with these men who have never served in the military? George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, the people who brought you the Iraq War, who have never served in the military. For them, like Donald Trump, the military is the answer. So we want to make America great again. We're going to boost the military. Yet when did we last win a war? How's that working?
Yeah.
And
he talks
luckily,
about he wants to get in a nuclear arms race. Have you heard this?
Well,
it's like, with whom?
Well, with his friend, probably he's going to talk about it behind with Putin. But luckily, as you mentioned earlier, luckily we have some good appointments. And of course, the great military leaders, and General Mattis appears to be quite a good leader, our Secretary of Defense, they understand the limits of military power. And they understand what military power can't do. And I will tell you what military power can't do, which Donald Trump is very busy eroding by the minute. Military power can't give you leadership. In today's world, leadership comes from setting an example. That's what soft power is. Being a country, a leader that people admire and want to emulate. That's what gives you power over people. You can't force yourself anymore, because in this 24/7 news cycle, communication, social media, citizen journalism, everyone is held accountable. You have to walk the walk.
This didn't work for Obama, though. I mean, you couldn't have a model of more of what you've just described, and it's been a failure.
Well, he didn't do all the things he said he would do.
Well, he didn't do most of the things that, but most of all, Trump is the gift.
Yeah, the legacy.
Well, yeah, correct, but that is exactly my point. President Obama gave fabulous speeches. Look at his Cairo speech. That was a great speech. He followed it up with exactly nothing.
Yeah.
And so the United States is now in lower esteem in the Arab world than it was under George W. Bush. So that is my point. You can't just talk. You have to walk the walk. You have to model the behavior. So we tell people all over the world about the importance of the freedom of the press and how you have to allow the press to criticize you. And now our press outlets are kept out of the White House. Who can we talk to about that now? You can't say a word.
Bush was very concerned about it.
There's something else that he's doing with the military buildup, which is it's backdoor Keynesianism. The Republicans have, they always object to deficit spending. But when you remember Reagan, right? So massive military buildup.
Two wars
exactly.
off the books.
But Iraq, that was some of the dumbest Keynesianism ever. They spent it all on these military contractors. By the way, Washington, D.C.
It was good for Cheney and Rumsfeld.
Yeah, and for my neighbors. So I live in Bethesda, Maryland, okay, suburb of Washington, D.C., and if y'all have ever been there, it's the richest city in America now. Why is it so rich? One of the reasons is because we've contracted out government to all of these private corporations. And we basically contracted out the Iraq war. And so Bush dumped all of this money on these contractors, and they all built these fabulous McMansions all over Washington, D.C. But Trump looks back to Reagan and sees, the massive military buildup of those years. And Trump understands one thing. Maybe Trump doesn't understand it, but somebody close to him is whispering in his ear who does get it, which is the way that you get reelected in America. It doesn't have anything to do with all of the stuff that we're talking about. It's by what Bill Clinton did, full employment. If you get full employment, you'll have real wage growth and you will get reelected. If he dumps enough public money, if he spends enough public money on the military or on infrastructure, whatever else he's been planning to, he will get reelected. He will get full employment and he'll get reelected. Now, about the Republicans, I often think of a remark that Grover Norquist, y'all don't know Grover Norquist, he's a wonderful person. Actually, maybe he'll move down here. But they said to, they were talking about Mitt Romney. And Romney was running for president, and somebody said to Grover, he's not really, he's not a real conservative, he's a squish, or whatever the term is that they use. And Grover said, well, can he move his hand? Because that's all they need. They just need someone to sign their legislation. And Trump can move his hand, folks. Now, I want to say something nice about Trump before we, as we smack this piñata around. So I want to say something nice about Trump, which is this man smashed the establishment wing of both parties in my country. He comes out of nowhere, has no political experience at all, and destroys the careers of all of these Republicans. Jeb Bush, Ted Cruz. I was at the Republican convention when they booed Ted Cruz off the stage. It was the most beautiful thing. It was fantastic. And here comes Trump doing his, professional wrestling, this scowl, he walks into the, anyhow. He destroyed the establishment wing of both parties, and he ended two political dynasties, the Bushes and the Clintons. You gotta, thank the man for that. Okay, but that's all over now. Now we can go back to cursing him. Okay.
If you would like to ask a question, put your hand up and start talking if a microphone's put in it. Yeah.
One of the supporters of the Republicans traditionally has been the Koch brothers. They seem to have been, as far as I can tell from here, fairly quiet in the lead up to the election. That may be a wrong perception, but can you tell us what's happening with them and what they did during the election and where they're going now?
Yeah, they're fellow Kansans. I'm from Kansas, so are they. They didn't like Trump. A lot of traditional sort of free market Republicans didn't like Trump because of the trade issue that I mentioned. I mean, the Republicans have always been the party of markets, free trade, or at least in my lifetime. And here's this guy, bad-mouthing this stuff. No, they don't like him. In fact, most traditional Republican donors didn't like the guy. Fascinating fact, I think one of the most compelling facts of this last election, Hillary outraised and outspent Trump 2-1. The Wall Street people were behind her. A lot of the traditional Republican donors came together around Hillary. She was running a sort of campaign of national unity. I was at the Democratic convention as well, and she had Republican after Republican up on the stage endorsing her. It was extraordinary. And all these traditional conservative people despise Trump. I mean, Jesus Christ. Romney himself denounced the guy. I read the Washington Post every day. George
Before
Will.
he sucked up to him.
Yeah, that's right. Now they've all changed. Now they're all like, back, pedal back. But George Will, our most famous conservative columnist, hates the man. Absolutely, it calls him a liberal. I know, it's hilarious. But yeah.
This might be a bit obscure, in which case jump it, but I was very struck reading Listen Liberal to your assault on education, on tertiary education. And having been involved in that area for a long time myself, I've been brought up, the future lies with education. If only we can educate people more. And I would suppose I'm what Jonathan Haidt calls a weird, Western, educated, industrial, I've forgotten the rest of the term. But I wondered, both of you, what do you see as what is happening to tertiary education and the impact of that on the body politic? Because it does seem to me that there is, certainly here, a huge commercialisation of tertiary education, a shedding of all sorts of traditional values about what a real education means. Now, is that, and that seemed to me much part of what Listen Liberal was saying at the early part of the book. I wondered where both of you might see the future of education and its implication for the Western world in general, but America in particularly, and its political implications, short and longer term, short and medium term.
Wow, this is a subject I write about a lot, and it's really where this one of the sort of sources of this book. So I got a PhD in history years ago, and by the way, the school that I went to the University of Chicago. This is in the 80s and the 90s, to get that PhD. You know what it costs to go there today? $65,000 a year, American. So 4 years of that as an undergrad, that's north of $250,000, okay? Nobody has that kind of money. Now, I know they give lots of kids discounts and stuff like that, but that price tag alone, that's the beginning of the problem. The second part of the problem is that students have to borrow to get that, to pay that kind of money. And I know, plenty of kids starting out in life who are $100,000 in debt, and they can't discharge that in bankruptcy because of the law in our country. They're stuck with that. They've got that millstone around their neck, and they can't get free of it. The third thing I want to mention is what happened to people like me who got those PhDs. And I wrote history, right? My first book was an academic. Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore. I got out onto the job market in 1994 and discovered there were no more, or very, very few, tenure track history jobs, and that instead we were all supposed to work as what's called adjuncts. Do you have that here? So as the university is, you understand what I'm getting at here, this is the corporatization of the university. So as they're able to charge these unrestrained amounts, and they increase much faster than the rate of inflation every year. This is the private universities, the state use, they're running a little bit behind. As they're doing this, they're also casualizing the faculty. Okay, now this is before the internet, so it wasn't the internet that did this to us. It wasn't automation or productivity or any of those things, which have done such damage to, say, musicians or taxi drivers or something like that. This was just labor, labor management strategy that these universities engaged in, and my generation of PhDs basically were stuck with this. That was their future, was working for it. And you want to know how much I got paid for teaching college courses? $1,500 a semester. That's $1,500. The students are paying these incredible amounts. And adjuncts to this day get paid just a little bit more than that now. If you want to work as in higher education, go out and get a PhD, which takes, as you must know, many, many, many years to accomplish. And then you work at one of these jobs. You have to put together 3 or 4 of them and drive around the city frantic. It's a shitty way of life. It's a terrible way of life.
Well,
now,
we should ask Cynthia here because she's in it.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yes.
One last point, and then Cindy's going to tell us. So I live in the heart of what I call in Listen Liberal the liberal class. The liberal class, which is a term that I forget where I got it from, but it's a term that I use to describe the professional managerial class. And I live in the heart of it, in Bethesda, Maryland, where I think something like 50% of the population has PhDs. And the kids are so incredibly achievement conscious. They all carry around in their heads the hierarchy of American universities, okay? They know which ones are better than which other ones. I have a friend, his son, the boy was, 8, and he said, "Daddy, is Williams above Princeton or is Princeton above Williams?" You see what I'm getting at? This incredible social status of these things. I mean, they command this incredible cultural, status. And that is reflected in the Democratic Party, where the Democratic Party, I don't want to really wail on the Democrats here because it's a reflection of the sociology of the professional class. By the way, the book is not an anti-intellectual book by any means. To write Listen Liberal, I had to do a whole lot of reading in academic literature, the literature of the sociology of professionalism. Sorry, I talk too much, folks.
Cynthia, please.
Just really quickly from another
No,
tack.
don't rush it because you are
okay.
in Georgetown University, so I think you're well placed to respond to this.
Well, I've spent my life in university and have another, PhD in art history, which of course qualifies me to speak on all these political subjects. But I'll evaluate your paintings after this. But I'm looking more broadly. People who are getting jobs today, I don't know exactly if it's the same here. I have 2 kids in their 20s. They're going to work in multiple different careers throughout their lives, most of them. Many of them don't want to work for companies anymore. They're going to work on their own, starting their own businesses. One of the dangers of the increasing, sort of professionalizations of education is the diminution of my area of the humanities. And you hear, parents saying, "Oh, no, you can't get an English degree or a history degree. You have to get a business degree." Don't ever let your children get an undergraduate business degree. Certainly not if they're in America. That is a dead end. And what we're beginning to see is, how do you make money? You make money by thinking. And what do the humanities do? They teach you to think critically. Now, to have a job, most people are going to have to get another degree after undergraduate. The really good news about that is it frees up undergraduate. You can't get a job from your undergraduate education. So learn to think. Do what you love. And going to a job interview and talking about something you are passionate about, and know about is much more likely to get you your first job than being able, if you love accounting, then become an accountant and talk about that. But it frees you up. Now, for the graduate degrees in the area that I went, in art history, which, thank you, my husband paid for, now at most universities, they take many fewer people, recognizing the challenges of getting a job, and it's free. They've raised the money so you don't pay for it, because they know when you come out with a humanities PhD, you can't pay that back. So it's definitely an imperfect system, but there is some adjustment. Where the United States, I think, is way behind and needs to improve dramatically is in vocational education. We just sort of let that go. I'm not in favor of just tracking people. I think, people should be able to choose what kind of education they want. But we don't have much in the way of an alternative to an academic education, and that's something we really have to improve.
Thomas.
Australia,
Yes.
like
Thomas, Frank, thank you for coming to Melbourne and
It's my
loving our
pleasure.
city. Cynthia,
What a beautiful city.
thanks for coming back. Thank you all for coming, and have a lovely night.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.